Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Westworld. I'm one of your hosts, Ash, and alongside me is my co-host, Big D Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And this is our deep dive episode where we look back on this week's episode of Westworld and provide our thoughts and analysis. And just as a reminder, this week's episode was entitled Fidelity. And Big D, since watching it on Sunday night, have you had any new thoughts? Have you had any new ideas? What's changed?
So watching it again, second time relaxed, there was a lot of little details that I missed upon the first watch. And a lot of things made more sense. I appreciated the way they constructed the episode. Things that I thought were a bit cheesy in the action the first time through. I was more on board with your thought that, she's a competent, action, she's a competent badass, I should say. So upon second viewing, I enjoyed it much more. And it just kind of started to sink in that there's 2 more episodes and that's it. So it got my mind working where we're going. But for this episode, I think on par with the last, even a little bit better.
Yeah, I definitely think we are on our way to a cliffhanger ending. I don't know if there's going to be a way to wrap up all the things. And I hope that means if it is a cliffhanger, that there'll be less time in between the seasons so that we can get an answer sooner. And then the other thing that I think is really interesting is just watching the commentary online. So a good litmus test for us is always YouTube, because YouTube is the first place to tell us that they don't like us or to tell us that they do. And this last Instacast that we posted for the first time this season, the YouTube is really split. Like, we've got about 45-ish comments on that one particular episode based off of when we're recording this. There most likely will be more once, this airs. But if you go through and you read all of the commentary that people are leaving, people are either absolutely loving this season and feeling like, episode after episode is the best episode, quote unquote, of Westworld ever. Or you have people who really don't like it. The season has been very divisive, and the further into the season we get, the more divisive it is. And I think that's exciting. When a show makes people either love it or hate it, those are shows that I particularly really enjoy. I've mentioned the OA before. That was a show that you either fucking loved or you thought was weird as shit, right? There was no middle ground on a show like that. And I like shows that make bold statements. And so it's exciting to see Westworld kind of get into a groove where whether you like it or not, it knows what it is, and it's making some really bold statements and making some big sweepy moves toward whatever this ending is that we're going to get to.
So you talking about a cliffhanger got me a little bit worried all of a sudden, because the numbers are down from the historic high of the first 2 seasons, even down from the third. This is not a cheap series.
No.
So my fear, I'm thinking, okay, we've not greenlit, or we have not heard that season 5 is a guarantee. It's the plan to do it. But, the streaming industry right now is challenging. You have Netflix really in a hole budget-wise and with user base, like going down 200,000, I think, a month. So I hope that they've planned ahead, that if this season ends, that it can stand on its own. If we get a cliffhanger like, whoa, what's going to happen? And then it doesn't come back, I don't want another leftovers fight on our hands. Because to get that final season took people protesting outside the HBO studios in Manhattan, dressed up as a guilty remnants. Please, I hope the ending is worth the journey.
Well, and thank God we got season 3 of The Leftovers, because that is one of my favorite just ever endings of any show of all time. But as far as cliffhangers go, I think we may be heading for a daddy-daughter meet-up cliffhanger where Caleb, I think, is going to have to find Frankie out in the real world. So the new printing of Caleb, I'm predicting that he's going to go and hopefully meet up with his kid, which I think would be really nice and cathartic for all of us, because Maeve is with her too. So we wanted to start tonight thinking about that, thinking about what a lot of people are predicting for how this season may end. We wanted to start by talking about Caleb, because this was a fairly gruesome episode for Caleb, or shall we say the Calebs, right? And going back and rewatching this episode, one thing that I really liked about this multiple Caleb storytelling here is that you have the perfect outline for how good players play video games and what Caleb is doing. Every time you die in a video game, you learn. This is something I've been trying to teach my son, that you shouldn't just get upset every time you die in a game. You should learn from how you died so that you can go further next time. And then you die again, and then you continue to push and push and push. You learn how to progress toward that ultimate end goal. And I really liked that that's what Caleb is doing through this episode. He is using his past failures and he is learning from them in order to eventually get further in this game that Charlores is making him play. And it's almost like if like Mario and Luigi could tell themselves like when Bowser was going to come around the corner for that final level so that they know when they go in there how to not get smashed. And Caleb is trying to do this so he knows how to not die. And whether that is being incinerated, trying to get out of the room, whether that's falling to his death, whether that's actually finally getting out on the roof, we can see that Caleb has been playing this game for a while. We see the bodies that have come before, and on the rewatch, I thought this was kind of a brilliant storytelling device.
I mean, but I think the strategy, because Hale wants to get, I'm going to stop saying Charlores because just Hale is easier. That Hale's goal is she wants to find out what Caleb's secret is. That's the main reason. Why wouldn't she try a different strategy? Let's commingle all the Calebs. Let's put them in a large room together, print a new batch, and just sit back and observe the collective. Let's see how they problem solve together. Let's hear them talk. Let's hear them discuss their collective pasts. I think that way she would have gotten much more information than she does on these one-offs, because besides being time consuming, it has just got to be a tedious exercise where some fall short, some exceed, and you never know what you're going to get. She's got to try a different direction, and that looks like what she's doing.
Well, it's like an escape room, right? It's like she's put him through an escape room that she wants him to escape from. And if you've done escape rooms, you don't escape every time. And it's got to be so frustrating for those people who sit in the hallway and watch you on the cameras and give you the clues that you can't figure it out, the same way that it is for Charlores here. And we know she's not happy with the outcome, with the information that she gets. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit, about why she's so disturbed and so disgusted by what Caleb decides to do with this opportunity to quote unquote escape. And the question I want to kind of pose is there something we're supposed to be learning here about the fact that Caleb chooses to use his time to contact his daughter, which shows how very much he loves his daughter? He goes through all of this hassle to come out and just make a phone call to her and tell her that he loves her. And for Charlores, it feels like a waste. It feels like a waste of an opportunity for him to escape. And it's a waste of an opportunity for her to learn what it is that is the secret, that's the key to why these outliers are affecting the host in the way that they are. But is this the marker of a truly successful, fidelity tested host? Because think about Maeve. We know that Maeve loved her daughter, and that started through her cornerstone. She was given that cornerstone about her daughter, and that's what defined her originally. And then they remade her into the madam that she was. But the love of her daughter, we watched over 2 brilliant seasons. We found out that it was a real love that she had that spread both through and like outside of that loop that she was on. And I think we all can agree that Maeve is one of, if not the most human-like and conscious quote unquote host, beyond maybe Bernard, right? So are we learning here that love is the key to these hosts becoming human-like?
I mean, I think it shows a lot of how Hale is out of touch. Hale is so far from the answer, she can't even conceive it. She asks Clementine, do you spend time with these humans out there? Do they get under your skin? She can't conceive of what's going on with them, that she says everything is a nuisance. Everything is tiresome. She is so far, and I wonder if it's because she has no one to challenge her. No one to grow against who can challenge and say, hey, I think you're a little bit off. The Man in Black tries it, and she quickly puts him in his place. So without a sounding board for her ideas, she's left to go so far astray. You wasted your opportunity to contact your daughter. when she doesn't realize how powerful that connection and how powerful love is.
Agreed. Absolutely. And I do think that there's something further here with this idea of love and how that links back to the outliers themselves. So the outliers have all mentioned loved ones when they talk about how they've broken these loops, whether it's a sibling or a husband or a brother. They've all mentioned a person and a connection to a person. And so perhaps that type of human connection, as you're kind of talking about, Big D, maybe that's the key to resistance. And for Caleb and Maeve, we know that it was the key to their own sort of resistance of the loops that they were on and to fix kind of this lack of humanity that the host like Maeve initially had. And even Christina, we know, and I know there's still the argument, is she human or is she host? But she was awoken by a lover and a friend in Teddy. And so if that type of emotion, if love can be channeled correctly, then perhaps the key to saving humanity is capturing what I personally think is the greatest of all human traits, which is this ability to love others more than yourself and to sacrifice yourself for others that you love. And we know Caleb is doing that. He uses his time to call his daughter. We know Maeve did that. We have that great scene where she fights everybody in season 2 so her daughter can enter the sublime. And she does it again this season to save Caleb by taking the man in black down with her. So I think those connections really are starting to make themselves clear.
I mean, Maeve got out of the park, basically. She was on the train. She could have escaped. And it was the thought of her daughter that brought her back into the park. She ultimately gets that dole. She finds her daughter. But yet she chooses to give her life defending the gate to get them into the valley beyond. That is when I think she truly ascends. And you compare every one of our characters that's become aware. Bernard and his son, the man in black and his wife's memory or his daughter. You have Peter, even with the memory of Dolores, the drive. It's that connection. You have to have a strong support system with other entities, whether they're humans or hosts, because together you can overcome challenges much easier and you have a better state of mental well-being. And one of our listeners who wrote in for the Telegraph, and I'm just going to bring this one up but quick because I don't know that everyone listens to the Telegraph, but Maria wrote in for the Telegraph and she wrote in about human connections. I want to give her credit for this. She said, it's all about human connection, the bond formed between people to build trust and feel valued and seen. According to Maslow's hierarchy, love and belonging are the most important needs after physical and environmental needs are met. Without it, we humans don't develop properly. We can't make our way up the triangle of self-actualization and finally transcendence. So I think that is something that Hale can't even conceive of, that her hosts might feel isolated and alone. And that's one of the big problems they're facing.
I completely agree. And I think that needs piece is really important here because we know that these outliers aren't having their needs met by the new world order that they're in. So they reject that new world order and they break out of those loops that Charlores has them in. And then we've also got our hosts that find their needs are not met either. And granted, they have a fairly dramatic response to that by committing suicide, but still we have, a connection between these two realizations that needs aren't being met. And like you're saying, that need to feel secure, to feel safe, that base need of humanity, clearly the hosts have some of that too. And that's pretty interesting. So the final thing that I want to say here is I just want to bring it back to the fact that clearly what's going to define a lot of the last 2 episodes is how angry Charlores is. And the show, I think, spends a lot of time showing us just how pissed she is at Caleb's lack of spilling some secret that connects all of the things. Her thinking oh, this is going to be that one thing I need to know to shut all these people down and to save all the hosts and have the world that I want. And I get why she's mad. She's wasted her time printing dealing with almost 300 Calebs, thinking she's going to get some quick answer. But I have a question. So we now know that Dolores from season 3, we know that she chose Caleb as her partner in crime, let's say, because of what the Rehoboam data said about him. We know that's why Dolores Prime wanted him to partner with her. But correct me if I'm wrong, Shat community, Charlores Hale, she never was made privy to that data. And so what exactly is she looking for? Like, is there a copy of that data out there that she could maybe get her hands on to answer this question easier than creating the almost 300 Caleb copies? And as far as the audience, I think we're still asking the same question she is, which is why the hell is Caleb so damn important? And for me, I know we did our, gosh, this is what we hope we get out of the season. This should have been my biggest question. And it's the one I have going into the penultimate and the final episode of this season, which is that why is Caleb important? And I hope they at least give us the answer to that. And if they do, I can deal with any cliffhanger, because that I think is like the bridge between season 3, season 4, and what's going to come in season 5 is why is he the key?
What I think is funny is this is a replay again of season 1. You got the man in black. You got William, who's playing this big game. There's a game underneath. I need to find the center of the maze. And when he gets there, it's not at all what he thinks. And when Dolores has that stupid maze game in her hands and just his disappointment, right now, Hale is doing the exact same thing. Charlores is doing the exact same thing. She thinks there's this big mystery in the maze when the answer is simple. And I hope we're not Charlores at the end of the season where we say, why did we get tricked into this maze, being the show? But I got to ask this question. Why does she care? Yeah. Why? It's a huge waste of time and resources for a problem that really doesn't exist. You've got to build these hundreds of Caleb loops. You got to go hunt Frankie. You got to replace one of the outliers with a mole. But why? It's not a big problem. You have a handful of outliers. There's no giant army of outliers, gathering in the desert. We've seen a handful of them. They have zero impact on Charlores' world. Why does it fascinate her so much? Is it simply boredom? Or is it that she demands 100% fealty? She's acting more like a cult leader, like a Jim Jones or like a Branch Davidian than anything else. And cults always end badly when the cult leader either loses control or people start to break off.
Well, and I think that's part of the problem. I like your cult analogy here, because if she refers to herself, or if others refer to her like a god of this world that she's created, a world of her own making, the rules of that world and the ideology of that world have to be very, very clear. And I think almost in a way she's frightened by the fact that it isn't clear anymore for her, and she's the one that created it. And I don't know about you, but when I'm scared, I get angry. Like, those two emotions are very deeply connected for me. Same for my kids. A lot of the times when they're acting angry, they're actually really scared about something, right? And so I'm wondering if she doesn't have some fear about this loss of control, and she's like feeling like she's tearing her skin off like she has since last season with all the scratching. So things are glitching in the Matrix here, people, and she's not doing well.
No, she's not. Now, I want to talk about something that I kind of hinted to on the Instacast about the concept of hope and the importance that it has in the show and in just everybody's life. It should have been obvious. If we had looked back to last episode, the showrunners spell it out for us. The outlier host that we meet is named Hope. That's the theme of the season. I think they were giving it to us on a silver platter. They were spelling it out for us. And I think when Hale teases Caleb, when he's running through the maze 100 times, it's like a trapped rat. And she says, all I needed to do was give you a little bit of hope to keep you going. And that's something I think that's very important. We're always busy talking about, actualization and free will. And what does it mean to make decisions in your life and where you end up? I think we're underestimating also the feeling of hope and being together. We've all heard the stories of old couples who've been married for 70 years. They were dating in high school. One dies. The next one goes almost immediately after. It's because they can't go on without the other. And studies have long linked despondency with death. Researchers in Denmark and the US have shown that for years, immediately following a child's death, a mother faces a much higher risk of death themselves. There was a Swedish study that found patients had a risk of death from heart attacks or stroke immediately after receiving a diagnosis of cancer. And the likelihood of a heart attack or stroke or a severe illness after the cancer diagnosis became exponentially higher. It's because when people have a darker future, when they don't view any kind of light at the end of the tunnel, that they usually succumb.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially the whole child dies and the mothers face a much higher risk of death themselves. I can't imagine the grief that comes from something like that. And I think the thing is obviously the grief is there because you love that person, but it also shakes up the world order in a way that you're not expecting. There's a way that the world is supposed to work, which is that you outlive your kids. You know, the grandparents die first, then the parents, then the kids. Like that's the natural way of things. And when that is shaken up, it causes you to question everything about your reality. And that is what's happening on this show is these people are questioning in a very extreme way the nature of their reality. And unless you have consistency and unless you have that safety in knowing what your world is supposed to be, it's very difficult to have, whether you call it hope or stability. And without those things, it's very difficult to operate in the world successfully. And I think our physical health is directly linked to that, which is why like depression and things like that went up exponentially during the pandemic, because our world order is meant for us to socialize and not all be separate in our homes and be able to talk to one another. And when you cut that off, it causes people's health to be severely affected.
I mean, I think it's purpose. You look like my grandmother survived at least 15 years longer than she would have because there were children in the house all times. Once the children went away, she quickly deteriorated because you need a purpose. And to get to that study that I hinted in the Instacast, David helped me, one of our listeners, and he brought up, it was a John Hopkins study by a professor named Kurt Richter in the 50s. And what he had done was he conducted an experiment with wild rats. He put them into a jar half filled with water, and then he watched them drown. The idea was he wanted to measure the amount of time that they swam before they gave up and went under. So the first rat, Richter noted, swam around excitedly on the surface and then just dove to the bottom, stopped swimming around, and died after only 2 minutes. Richter then tweaked the experiment. He took other similar rats, he put them in the jar, but here's the big difference. Just before they were expected to die, he would reach in, he would pick them up out of the water, he'd give them a break, and then he would put them back into the water. And in this, he wrote that the rats who experienced this brief rescue, they swam longer, they lasted longer than the rats that were left alone. They also recovered almost immediately. When the rats learned that there was no doom, that the situation was not lost, that there might be help coming for them, was what made all the difference. And if you look at our characters in the show, you got Frankie and Caleb. They have collectively survived, resisted the flies, and were both driven by that one common factor, hope for each other, that they would find each other alive, that C would find her father, even though everyone around them, and she's around Jay, and Jay tells her, what's the point? Why are you leaving these messages? Caleb is dead. She continues because of hope. She even says, I still send the messages to the old frequency. I know it's crazy. She's aware of it, that it's ridiculous, but there's still a chance. I need to know. And we get the answer on why these two may seem to be so special. So during the flashback, when young Frankie skins her knee, when she falls down, she says, I can't walk. And Caleb comes over and gives the dad pep talk. And that's where he reveals, it's a bit cheesy, but I think it's important, that this is how he managed to resist the flies and how Frankie and C has managed to resist and survive this long. He says, you know what kind of person can't be beat? The kind of person that doesn't give up. Now, there's obviously a difference between hosts, humans, and rats, but I think one similarity stands out is that we all need some kind of hope to keep swimming.
I just want to point out here that we are going to get a PETA complaint at some point on this podcast because we got so much feedback about my emu story, about my friend Ricky that shot his birds, and now we're talking about drowning rats. So I don't know if that's a good trend, but this is a really cruel experiment. But I think that it is a deeply true experiment. Working as I have in the industry that I work in, what's really interesting about it is you can tell the individuals that have some sense of hope in their life, that have somebody that is checking up on them, that has somebody that is asking about them, or that is going to hold them accountable to something. Those individuals are much easier to work with. The others are just like, fuck it, and they don't care, and they're very difficult to break through with. They have to have that being held, that break from the water, whatever you want to call it. And so it makes a lot of sense. And in this world that we're examining, that break from the water is very difficult to find. It's very difficult unless you are an outlier. And you would think that they would find hope in the realization that they found the real world, like when waking up in the Matrix, let's say. But as we know from just the Matrix movie, waking up carries its own burden and lack of hope. And so it's this weird cycle that the people in these situations find themselves within, that even though they get a break from the water, some of them still succumb to it in the end because they still don't have quite enough hope to keep them going. And that's kind of what we find out about the outliers in this episode. We have here this conversation that's happening between Hale and Caleb of like, what's the key? You know, how do I stop all of this? And we get into this discourse about the way these hosts that are interacting with the outliers are not being infected, unless you think metaphorically that they're just being infected with the truth, with knowledge, because hosts are having their own kind of like ethical, like existential crisis when they're confronted by the idea in these outliers that they're holding humans captive as slaves, despite them being conscious creatures, similar to the way that they were treated in the parks. And I want to give a shout out to someone on YouTube, to Earthwatcher 2022. I want to read what they wrote on one of our YouTube videos. Earthwatcher said, "Remember, the hosts becoming sentient, they became alive or human after years of suffering in their loop tied to their cornerstones. Now that they're free from their narrative, a host shouldn't want anyone to be a slave. Thus, they become conflicted and can't live with themselves and ultimately kill themselves." And I love what Earthwatcher is saying here, because maybe like that's the infection that Hale has. Like that's what's glitched in her. What's wrong is that she does want to enslave humans in a way that these other hosts don't. She hasn't evolved to the point that her creations are, and maybe that's why they can't understand the world that she's created and exist within it.
Well, I think going back to what I said about the cults, that the cult of Charlores, the cult of Hale, what cults need, one of the first things they do is they isolate the members from their families. Mm-hmm. They isolate them from other people. We've not seen a large group of hosts together. They seem to live solitary, isolated lives. And it would be interesting for me to see, where are they? Are they all in some virtual world, a Charlores version of the Valley Beyond? Because I think I need to see what their society looks like to truly understand what's going on with them, what's wrong with them. And there's a lot of questions I have. And I basically put down to tie into what Gene normally does about this time, which is like the explain me this, which is like the things in the show that I kind of just wonder about. And the first one I have is the location of your outlier humans, like their secret base. We know it's their secret base because that's what Bernard says. Bernard says, I know you're taking me to your base. I know it well. I've been there. Why would you, if you're hiding from Charlores and the host, why would you build your secret camp in Temperance? This doesn't seem exactly secret, or is it obvious? Maybe just hide in the place they wouldn't look first?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. The only thing I liked about it is it looked like Westworld. It was all dusty and deserty and overrun. And it gives us that piece that we were given where we get that flash where we see, you know, in Bernard's vision that the Temperance Park is covered in sand and dust and is abandoned. And I thought that was really cool, but you'd think it would be the first place they come to look.
Obviously. And I think also I'm a little disappointed that there's not more members of the resistance. I thought there was going to be this large force, but it wasn't. So another question I have, explain me this. How did Hale know exactly that the rebels were coming to the city? C assumes there must be a mole who's told her, you know, but how exactly did they know that this group was coming, that you could quickly replace J? And they tell us that in some of the instances, they replace Stubbs. Sometimes it's her girlfriend. Are you standing by with all these different options to replace him? How does she know that the resistance is coming? Is it just a fact that whenever an outlier is identified, they always show up? Or was there something else going on?
I mean, I'm still confused as to how the resistance finds out about the outliers. Like, how do they get the information to them? Because it's like beep, beep, we've got another one.
Exactly.
But like, is there like a hotline? Like, is there like a red phone that you pick up and that you call? Because it seems like they don't know in the flashback scene, which I loved, by the way, the flashback of them taking this guy out just because we got to see young Frankie. But when we joked about how they all stood there and then one of them blinked, like we get the idea here that you can find your way around these drone bots to get out. So clearly, I don't think that Hale knows immediately, but how do the resistance people know?
Maybe there's a host whistleblower,
Right?
the one who's feeding them information, because it seems ridiculous. You know, we commented that incompetence previously has been demonstrated as part of a trap, but that you can hack a drone and remotely access it, that you have a feed into the identification of these outliers in real time, that you can infiltrate the city. Jay saw what the drones look for. He knows you got to play freeze tag. But yet when he re-enters the city as an adult, he's forgotten that and keeps running and didn't prep the other members of the team. Hey, if you see everybody stop, let's just stop them.
Why haven't explained me this? Explain to me how Caleb is in the vent system, drops like 2 stories down, and then walks out on the roof. Like, I don't understand the makeup of the building that he's in at all.
If Hale wants him to get to the ultimate destination, which on the roof could be his radio that he sets up, wouldn't you make it a little bit easier? Maybe pile up the bodies below. Put a rope. How are you going to know? How are the Calebs going to know?
Put a fireman's ladder.
There's a ladder there. There's a rope. Or maybe like leave a fake map. Like Caleb wrote the map. Or even better, have a radio in the room where he finds all the extra clothes and all that. Give him something that would give him a clue, you know. But for me, the last one is that the reveal here that Bernard, through all of his loops, knows that one member of the assault team is going to get replaced. He knows it. It could be any of them. Sometimes it's Stubbs. Wouldn't he tell Stubbs, hey, keep an eye out. Somebody's going to get replaced. And what he could do is give like a password to Stubbs. Like, Stubbs, when you come back and it's not you, I want you to say banana. Something ridiculous like that he could know it was not Stubbs, because there is a chance. There is some fluctuation in what eventually happens. What if C kills the wrong person? What if she then kills Stubbs? It wasn't Stubbs. I think you would reduce the potential mole options if you had just let him in on what was going on.
I think the problem, though, is that it's like the butterfly effect. He can't affect anything. He has to just let it play out and figure out which one of these scenarios he's in. Otherwise, he's influencing it. And so then it would change. So I think it's that whole time travel paradox, right? That if you change anything, the future's changed. I think the same thing applies here.
And talking about those loops, I had a nightmare that at the end of this season, we're going to realize we've just been through one iteration of Bernard's like experiences.
Yeah.
That he's going to wake up back on the hotel room bed, and it's going to be the beginning of another loop. That at the last episode of the season, they're going to fail. And this has all been just iteration 8,755 or whatever it is. I think we would have just a collective sigh that we could hear out loud if that happens.
Say it ain't so. Well, the final thing we want to do is we want to kind of go through some little odds and ends that didn't kind of fit anywhere else. And the first one comes from me. I'm just wondering if we're ever going to get more information on the Temperance Park. Like, how long was the park open? How many people attended the park? How did it work? Was it popular? Did they open other parks? Like, I'm just curious about it. And I also just wanted to say that I love the reveal that the data collection changed from using the hats to using mirrors, which I think is really brilliant to play on this idea of vanity of everybody that's going to these parks. It's pretty great.
I just think it would be funny that if Westworld, all of a sudden, every room had like a full-length mirror. And especially where people are shooting around. What, now all of a sudden you can't shoot the mirrors, but whatever. I did see in the featurette of the episode, Ash, that if you zoom into the background of that long shot of the dystopian temperance, they put a nod to the old movie from the 70s that there is Roman world in the very back that they're hoping they could see again. So I thought that was kind of cool.
That's fun.
But I think we have an idea of how long, to answer your question, the time is, because we see young Frankie when they go to get young Jay. It seems at that point that pretty much most humans have been taken over, that there's only a couple outliers. And she looks roughly about a year or two older than she did. So we can assume that the park may be 2 years, because they said it wasn't built to last. And I think that was a nod to the fact that they weren't planning on it being around a long time. That would just get the virus out there, get the flies, get the parasites, and we'll go pretty quick. But another odds and end here, we finally got the answer of why Frankie is called C. Some people had suspected it was Francesca Nichols, that it was a full-length version of her name, the formal name. But we learn here that that is simply Caleb's nickname for his daughter, Cookie.
Aww.
And the final odds and ends I have is the subtle nod that I love the show did for Maeve, that she is the Queen of Hearts. When Bernard is copying the control units on top of the poker table, the camera zooms out and we see right next to her control unit is the Queen of Hearts sitting face up. Obviously a nod to her, and I think that she obviously is going to come to be the pivotal character in the end of the season, where it seems like every season is revolving around Maeve, and she's going to come to some rescue. So I think we're in store for another one of those this season, hopefully.
I agree. And there's so much left to talk about, so much to unpack. We are rounding the corner toward the end of the season with only 2 episodes left. So please don't forget that we have our Telegraph, and we would love for you to participate in that. You can call in, you can write in. We'd love to hear any of your theories, any of your predictions, or just general commentary about all things Westworld. But that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Westworld. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, search for Shat on TV Podcasts. On our website, you can reach us at shatpod.com/TV, or you can email us at host@shatontv.com. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Please be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, leave a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D Dick Ebert and Jean Lyons, I'm Ash, and be sure to join us later this week for our Telegraph edition for this week's episode, Season 4, Episode 6, entitled Fidelity.